Hey guys, Z-House here, and today I'm actually going to be talking about a subject that I've discussed with people in person before, but I haven't really put my thoughts on it on video, and it's just something to consider as you guys are getting into the game and deciding how exactly you want to play the game. It's actually regarding impression kits. So to start, let's define my terms. What is an impression kit? An impression kit is when you build your Airsoft loadout to mimic in some capacity the appearance and the gear setup of a real member of the armed forces. So let's say you're building a loadout and you decide that you want to do an impression of a US Navy SEAL. Then you would go about building your loadout to look like a US Navy SEAL from whatever time period. Some guys will do them where they're inspired, where they do a kit that uses different elements maybe from different time periods around the same area. Like some guys will do a US Navy SEAL kit that's kind of era, and it'll be, it's a 1960s SEAL kit, and they won't go into, this was technically not around in 1968, but this was used in 1964. That kind of thing. But it's a whole other wormhole when you start getting into building an impression loadout. There's so many different standards, so many different terms: impression, inspired, kit bash, all kinds of different stuff. But the general gist of an impression is that you are building your loadout to match a unit or a faction of armed forces from the real world. And there are some pros and cons to this. For me and the way I play the game, mostly cons, but I will talk about the pros. So the pros of this are that you're going to have a loadout that is very high quality if you do a true impression. Because a true impression means that you're getting the real gear. So a lot of real military gear used by SF units is real, very high quality gear. So you're gonna have a lot of good stuff. A lot of Cry, a lot of Paraclete, a lot of Eagle. Your shit will last. You will have no problems using it on the field because it's probably already survived worse than you can throw at it if you're buying it secondhand. But that's one of the big pros is that, you're gonna end up using a lot of real gear. I use a lot of real gear too, so I can vouch that is something that's kind of nice when you're playing the game and putting a lot of money into your loadout. You want your shit to last, so it does. Then another pro is if you are on a team that all run the same impression. There are teams that will build themselves around various impressions. For example, Blue Diamond Group go to Milsim West and they all run Marine Corps grunt kits. Then there's a Ranger group that goes to, I think they call themselves Task Force Mayhem. They go to Milsim West games as Ranger impressions. Then there's the Rushing Russians, who go to Milsim West as Russians, obviously. And they all have varying Russian impressions. There's an entire forum called Red Alliance, all dedicated to Russian gear and Russian impressions. There's tons of Facebook groups, tons of different stuff like that. There's guys who do KSK, there's guys who do Grom, there's guys who do all kinds of factions and all kinds of countries and all kinds of units from all over the world. So there's a lot of really cool looking stuff there. And that's the other thing is some of the impression kits, if you do certain ones, they're kind of unique. How many guys, for example, do you see running around in Italian camouflage? Well, if you're doing an Italian impression kit, you're gonna have it. And guess who else is gonna have it? Anyone else doing an Italian impression kit. But that's not very many people. So you'll kind of be a snowflake on the field, you and your buddies. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. But that is another thing, is you might end up with a unique kit depending on the impression you do. That kind of ties right into a con of you might not, because literally everyone and their mother has at some point attempted a SEAL impression. So you might end up with DevGru kit number 8,462 at the latest game you go to, and no one's going to be able to tell you apart from everyone else wearing AOR1. But AOR1 is cool. I'm just using it as an example. So that's something to keep in mind too, is depending on the impression you choose, you may or may not end up with something cool and unique and original. But technically none of them are really original, but more on that later. Then another pro of impression kits is just, it's kind of fun to look up the reference pictures. It's fun. It's a fun process to find the stuff. And there's a very collector's element to it. You're gonna end up going on a lot of collectors forums. You're going to end up going in a lot of gear groups on Facebook and different forums and eBay and even your local surplus shops. There's a very scavenger hunt element to it. You know what you're looking for. You're looking for a particular thing in a particular color, maybe made by a particular manufacturer or a particular year. And there's a lot of, it's kind of satisfying to find exactly what you were looking for and to find that cool thing that just is so impossible and it's a collectible and it's rare, and then you find it and maybe you find it at the right price, or maybe you sell your kidney and then you get it, and there's a satisfaction to the hunt. It's that scavenger hunt element. It's really cool and really fun. So that's just another element that makes it fun. There is a lot of fun to be had looking up the references and pricing things out and putting together the kit list and doing all that. It can be a lot of fun. So that's why I think a lot of people enjoy it, even beyond the reenactment angle. Genuinely speaking, a lot of people who do impressions, I don't think are that serious about reenactment. There are plenty of people who are very serious about reenactment. Don't write your mean comment yet, but I do think there are a lot of people who do it partially just for the fun of finding and collecting the gear. I mean, heck, that's half the reason I buy the gear I do, because it is fun to find and collect and use real cool military gear. And then you arrange it in a real cool military fashion, and that adds to why you're doing it. That's what I think a lot of it comes down to. Then we get right into the cons of, okay, so what's the problem with doing impressions? Well, if you're doing impressions in the true impression manner, where you're buying all the real gear, as I said, shit's expensive. You may end up selling a kidney or two, or both, and living on dialysis for the rest of your life because you needed to find those woodland cries in your size. And guess what? A beat to shit pair of woodland cries is $500. Ask me how I know. I tried to find some. But that's something that you have to keep in mind, is it's a lot of money. That stuff all costs money, especially rare and hard to find stuff. I know, for example, this was just a discussion in the Milsim West General Interest Group. If you're building, say, a Chinese impression, of a Chinese unit, Chinese comm block gear is hard to find and hard to get, the real issued stuff at least, because there's not much demand for it in the United States. No one's importing it, and China isn't really exporting it either. And then if you need the proper weapon, if you're trying to find a Type 56, well, you need a real sword Type 56, or if you want, say, a Type 97, you need a real sword Type 97. Good luck. Those things are practically unicorns at this point. They're stupid hard to find. You can find them, but that adds to the expense of finding and getting all this stuff. And as I said, costs a ton of money, and it can be very difficult. Not everyone finds the scavenger hunt fun. So not everyone wants to wait 4 months to find the little piece that completes their impression. That's me. I'm also a difficult size to shop for, and that's another thing to keep in mind. If you are a difficult size to shop for, 6'3", 250 pounds, large barrel-chested man with a 38-inch waist, I need a large long BDU, an XL long depending on the country of origin or the manufacturer, 38 long in most cry cut pants. Good luck finding a lot of that stuff used in that size, because guess what? Anyone that size who's using it in theater is probably destroying it. And anyone who's not using it, if they're selling it, that's going to command top dollar if it's in like new or brand new condition. So it's very difficult when you're trying to find the real gear in the size you need. If you're not the operator size of 5'10", 150 pounds, you're screwed. It's just a sad reality. I've had to deal with it my entire life in one way or another. Another downside of impression kits is that you're building your loadout in the way that someone else built their loadout. So let's say you're like me and you don't necessarily think the LBT 6094 is the best plate carrier on Earth. It's a great plate carrier, but I personally prefer the Mayflower APC. How many units use the Mayflower APC? Not very many. So guess what? You either need to select a unit that uses the gear you like, or you just need to say fuck it and use the gear you like anyway and not care about impressions. That's the route I've gone, because when you're building your kit to that very particular list of items and to the period appropriate and to what you can get, it becomes very difficult once you start realizing that maybe not everything you're buying is something you really like, want, or need. For example, I actually very rarely wear a plate carrier anymore. There's not a ton of combat units that just go straight out in chest rig. I mean, there's some, but that's a sacrifice that I would have to make if I were to do, say, a CAG impression. Most of the time, they're wearing armor. I could technically do a recce kit or whatever, but just, again, that's a whole nother box of worms, where then I'm buying a large chest rig where I prefer my D3. So it's combining what you like with what is accurate to the impression, and sometimes that's difficult if you like a very particular thing and no one in the military or there's no reference pictures for a unit you like using it. You can't really build your impression off that. So what do? In my case, give up on impressions. You also might be arranging your gear in particular ways, depending on how the reference picture looks and what people are using. I know, for example, a lot of people who used to do SAS loadouts back when I started, chest-mounted Serpas are really popular with the SAS on their RAVs. So everyone who did an SAS loadout at the time had a chest-mounted Serpa. For example, I absolutely hate chest-mounted holsters. So no, I would not do that. But then if you took it off, the impressionist community would all say, oh, your stuff isn't squared away, it's not how they would use it, which then, again, comes back to sacrificing practicality to a certain extent because you're trying to use things a particular way that a certain unit uses it, and that unit probably has their own reasons for using it the way they do that may or may not apply to you. So, for example, I don't ride in vehicles very much, so why would I need a chest-mounted Serpa to be accurate to a commando unit that is riding in vehicles a lot during a deployment? I don't need that. And that's just a fact of the different needs. We're playing a game, and these guys are in combat in a very particular role, where we're playing a game and most of us are just generally acting as run-and-gun riflemen. So you're running into the clash of the worlds there. It's just a different set of needs. Now, some guys are wizards. Some guys will be able to find an impression that both fits their needs, fits everything they like, and is just something that they can get everything for. Some guys are wizards. I respect that. I get it. I get the impression angle. I get why people do them. I'm just explaining both sides here, and particularly my side, I guess, because I'm a little biased, but we'll keep that going. The other thing with impressions is there is a bit of a debate about patches. So I know personally several veterans who are on both sides or indifferent of the so-called patch debate of whether or not you should wear patches accurate to the unit you're reenacting. And there's some guys who feel like you didn't earn those, so you shouldn't wear them. And there's some guys who feel like, I don't really care as long as you're not trying to claim that you were in that unit. Again, this is one of those ones where I'm going to err on the side of caution and recommend that even if you're doing an impression, you probably just shouldn't wear anyone's patches. Make your own team patch that looks cool, but just I don't recommend wearing real patches. Again, I know that's an issue, that there are people on either side of it. There's even veterans on the side of they don't really care, but still, it's just one of those things. I don't recommend it. So that's been another thing that you have to keep in mind is how do you feel about that? And who are you talking to, and what is the predominant stance in your area? I generally tell people, just out of respect and to avoid getting chewed out, don't wear patches that you didn't earn. Find something else cool that's available on the civilian market. There's plenty out there, trust me. So as you can guess, I don't particularly care for building impression kits myself. I actually did recently get on a kick where I thought, oh, I'm going to do a MARSOC impression. That would be kind of cool. And then basically as soon as I started shopping for it, I realized I didn't actually want to do an impression. I just thought M81 Woodland with a multicam plate carrier looked awesome. So I just ended up building that loadout and disregarding the impression entirely. And I feel like that happens a lot with some people who say they're going to start an impression, and then they get deeper into it, realize that maybe there was something they liked about the unit, and they don't actually care enough to do an impression, and then they just go with their own freestyle. And I prefer that very much. I mean, if I see something on an airsofter, on someone at the range, on someone who's even in theater, and I see something that I think looks cool, or looks like a nice piece of gear, or looks like it might suit my needs, then I'll absolutely draw inspiration from that to build my own loadout, at least when I'm talking about like a milsim ready loadout. If I'm going out to River City, I'm just throwing my D3 on and calling it a day. But when I'm going to, say, a milsim game, or when I'm going to something at Hunter's Creek that's got a particular theme, I do try to build my gear kind of around a bit of a theme of, okay, I'm going to Hunter's Creek and we're rebels, so I'll grab, some jeans and I'll grab some civvy clothing. Then I'll throw on whatever chest rig is comfortable and grab my AK. And that's kind of how I do it, where there was a theme to my loadout sometimes, depending on the game and depending on how LARP heavy it is. Or I went to Gladio and there I had my plate carrier on and I had all my super cool tactical stuff because that's a milsim game. You're kind of expected to do that. I went to Milsim West and I had the BDU top as opposed to the combat top because that was what the chain of command wanted. And you have to follow certain rules. You have to use US-based load-bearing gear. Then I'm going to Caspian Breakout this year as a member of the militia. So I'm wearing some old school M81 bottoms, an Adidas track top, old school chest rig, kind of a crappy backpack. So I'm building it around a theme, but I find that to be a little more fun and more flexible of building gear around a theme that fits the game as opposed to building gear around a theme that fits a unit you're trying to do an impression of. I just find that more practical. Now again, is this to dissuade you from doing impressions? Absolutely not. The pros that I explained in the early part of my video, I know they seem far away now, and I know they seem like they were a short segment, but realistically speaking, I think that is a whole aspect of the fun of it that is why people do them despite the problems. And that's why when I see a well done impression, I can have some respect for that, as long as, again, no one's trying to claim anything that they're not, stuff like that. Don't be that guy. Don't give us a bad name. Don't do it. So I do have respect for a well-done impression. It is something that is kind of a bit of an art form. It's very much related to cosplay. Doing it well can be very hard, again, depending on the unit, depending on your body type and how you're shopping and stuff like that. But it's something to bear in mind. So I figured I would make this video because it's just a subject that I actually had a discussion with somebody recently about it, and I realized that I hadn't talked about it on video at all. So I just thought I would put it out there. If you have your own thoughts, if you have your own opinions, you can put those down in the comments. Just as always, I ask that you be respectful. Don't be a dick to anybody, please. But I figured that would be just about it for me. So once again, I'm E-House from Gun Gamers. I'm signing off. I'm back from Australia. No, I didn't buy any Auscam, but I'm back, so you're gonna be seeing a lot more of me. I hope you enjoyed your 2.5 week break. Peace.